Hey everybody, it's Paul with reporting live from my sofa. And you can tell that we are on a field trip out in the spooky owl-infested woods of North Carolina. Anyways, so as you already read from the title, as you already know if you follow my channel, that this case is my thing. I have always been fascinated with this case, love every aspect of it, except for the fact that there are victims in it, of course. But the psychology behind it, the mysteriousness behind it, the theories behind it, all of it is just extremely fascinating to me. And so today we are going to be jumping into the owl theory. Now, if you followed this case, you know that this is one of the most bizarre theories to come out in true crime in quite some time, and it's kind of trailed this case. So what I want to do before we even jump into the owl theory is I'd like to just go over some preliminary information for those of you who might not be familiar with the case. And again, there's plenty of videos to research and look up. If you don't know anything about this case, it is called the Stair case. It was a documentary, and it's had a couple of different segments to it, meaning they released some of it and then years later they released some of it because the case keeps going on and on and on and on. So, but it has finally finished, so to speak. And that's it. So let me just give you a brief rundown and then we'll jump into it. Okay, so this took place in Durham, North Carolina, which is the area that I am from originally and I'm currently living in right now. So, at December 9th, 2001, Michael Peterson claimed that he and his wife Kathleen were sitting out by their pool at nighttime. He said that she went inside to take care of some work emails, and a little bit later he found her clinging to life at the bottom of the staircase, covered in blood. He made 2 phone calls to 911. Once first responders got there, they really didn't feel like things added up, and eventually Peterson was charged with her murder, and what followed was one of the most notorious murder trials in North Carolina. And Peterson would eventually be convicted of first-degree murder, but years later he would be released due to misconduct by one of the state witnesses. And again, just there's so many aspects about this case that are just like, what? I mean, it's just, it doesn't end. So on that note, let's get into it right now. Again, I like to always say this, this is not an end-all be-all in the owl theory. There are many different versions of this, and there's also many different theories about what happened in this case. It's one reason why it has our fascination so much. So this is not a video trying to say that the owl theory is the only theory, or that my thoughts are the only thoughts. I welcome opinions. I welcome, other versions, other information. I absolutely encourage everybody to go do their own research on this. Come back to the comment section or contact me, whatever you want to do, and we can keep the dialogue going. I absolutely love that. That's what this channel is all about. And so on that note, we're going to go ahead and explore this with the information that I've uncovered so far. To give some context of where the owl theory came from, what we need to do first is jump to the end of the case, actually. Now, for the most part, most people don't believe the theories that have been presented, or they have conflicting feelings about all the evidence. So a lot of people aren't satisfied with the crime scene and all these situations presented. Most people don't believe that she fell down the stairs. I mean, this is pretty much just a given. And a lot of people think that he did, in fact, bludgeon her to death, but they get tripped up at the fact of, well, what did he do it with, and why aren't there other signs of a bludgeoning? And then other people don't believe any of that. Some people might think that the sun killed him, and then there's other people that think that it was something of a mysterious nature, something not really mysterious, but mysterious in the circumstances that an owl attacked her. And there is a lot of research that's been done by a certain person, and we are going to jump into that. And that person is Michael Peterson's former neighbor in his Durham neighborhood. He's an attorney by the name of Larry Pollard, and he is the one who came up with the owl theory, researched it, and presented it to Michael Peterson's attorney. So without further ado, let's introduce ourselves to Mr. Larry Pollard. Larry Pollard first petitioned for a motion for appropriate relief that a barred owl might have caused Kathleen's death back in 2009. Now, after the Dr. Phil episode that recently aired featuring Michael Peterson talking about the new book that he wrote, I started going, that's when I really sat down and said, let's look into this owl theory a little bit more seriously. And so I started researching, and I found my way to Mr. Pollard's website, and I reached out and contacted him. And surprisingly enough, he contacted me back and offered for me to call him, and he would explain the owl theory to me. And he did just that. And he was very generous with his time. I think he spent more than like an hour on the phone with me. And a lot of what he said was basically repeating the information that's on his website. And I'm going to post here in the pinned comment up above. I'll post that website so you can go look at it. Pardon me. But hearing him talk about it and go into detail was very interesting to me, and it kind of put a little bit more context to it. And again, I invite you to check this out yourself to get all the details. This isn't going to be an end-all, be-all of everything that he states about the owl theory, but I'm going to cover basically the essentials. So now, regardless if anybody believes him or not, or believes the information that he's presenting, he is pretty well researched in what he found, and so I feel like it is worth taking a look at here. So what I also want to do, and this is going to be a trigger warning because this is going to be coming up. Part of his argument is that the wounds on Kathleen's head match that of an owl's talons. So I will be showing those pictures, and they are a trigger warning if you don't like seeing kind of gruesome things, because they are hard to look at. So just be warned, that will be coming up in a couple of scenes here, or the next one possibly. Now, to continue on with the owl theory, so what Pollard did is once he started getting these details and researching and talking to experts, he brought this information to Rudolph. That was Peterson's attorney for the case that we saw in the staircase. But the evidence part of the hearing, it was at the very end of the trial, they couldn't enter new evidence, and Rudolph's whole argument had been that she legitimately fell down the stairs, and so nothing could come of it, and so that's why we didn't really see anything in the beginnings of the staircase. So with that being said, let's get ready to take a look at some of these wound pictures and go into that aspect of it and see what that looks like. One of the reasons that Pollard felt like an owl attacked her was because of the wounds. And this is one of his statements that he said about that. Miss Peterson may have been the victim of an attack, which caused puncture wounds to her elbows, injuries on her face and around her eyes, and lacerations to her scalp. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at these wounds, and I want to show you one of the renderings first because they aren't as graphic, so we're going to kind of warm you up to that. Now, as you can see here, she has these tears on her scalp, and I mean, these went all the way down to the bone, but she also has these odd puncture wounds, and these are kind of not all over her, but there's a variation of these on her body. And now, when Mr. Pollard saw these wounds, he didn't immediately think it was an owl. He noted that it looked like a bird of attack or something. Like, that was his first thought. It wasn't, oh my goodness, these are owls. He just thought it was some kind of a bird of attack or something. He just kind of made that connection in his mind, but that's what made him start researching, and we'll get to his actual research here in a little bit. But now, again, trigger warning, I want to go ahead and show you the actual autopsy photos that have the owl talons overlaying one of the wounds, so you can see. Okay, so now as graphic as this is, you can see how the talons do appear to lay over the wounds. I mean, it does look like an owl talon mark could have done this. And you can see how deep these cuts were. I mean, these went down to the scalp. Now, owl talons are supposed to be razor sharp. And they're also supposed to, and again, I'm no owl expert, so, please keep that in mind. Again, this is my little research here. I always like to give these little findings because I never want to come off like I'm trying to sound like I know everything about something that I only know what I've researched on. So, apparently when owls grab onto something, they clutch onto it and they lock onto it. This is part of their killing mechanism. And so this is kind of where Pollard is going with this. If these razor sharp things dug into her claw and latched on, it would essentially just rip her scalp open. And now she also, let's look at some other pictures here. Now she also had, excuse me, some of these weird puncture wounds on her body. And now there's another example you can see with the talons overlaid, and it does appear to match up to these weird puncture wounds that there doesn't seem to be a reasoning for. Now, another thing that was kind of mysterious is that she was found clutching hair in each of her hands, and it's hair that had been pulled out at the root. It wasn't cut. So she had, I think, in one hand 38 hairs and another one 25, which obviously isn't a ton, but she had hair in there. And so that was just another aspect of, well, what took place? Why was her hair pulled from the root in her hands? So what I think we need to do now is to go ahead and look at the scenario that Mr. Pollard thinks played out on that night. One of the key components that Larry Pollard stresses about the evidence and the events of that night is that the blood trail that the investigators looked at was backwards. Now, if you watch the show or you've researched this at all, you know that Kathleen was found at the bottom of the staircase and there was a massive amount of blood on her, on the staircase, everywhere. But there was also blood droplets outside the front door on the brick walkway. Blood was seen in the door handle, a smear above the door lock, and there was also a spot on the corridor floor. So essentially what Pollard alleges is that the view has always been that Peterson attacked Kathleen at the bottom of the stairs, and then at some point he went outside, which is where this blood came from, maybe to look at, check for the ambulance, something, but he took the blood out there. So what Pollard is asking us to do with his evidence and theory on the owl theory is to reverse this around. Now, he says he's a hunter, and he says that when hunting or tracking an animal, what you do is you find ground zero, where you struck the animal, and you go from there. And basically he says that you're always looking for a couple of blood droplets, and then it gets, more blood follows as the wound opens up. And essentially he's saying that that's what took place with Kathleen, the victim in this situation. So he suggests that what happened, and I'll get more into detail into this movement, but before I do that, I just want to give an overview. Essentially what he's saying is that outside the house, or near the circular driveway on the Kent Street side of the house, that's where he thinks that she was attacked by the owl, and that essentially she came inside, she fainted, went into shock, and ultimately bled to death. But that's just a quick overview, so let's kind of break that down, starting from her getting struck outside to making her way to the staircase. So as we know right now, Peterson states that Kathleen left him at the pool and went inside to do some work on the computer for her job. Now, what happens after that really varies on who you believe, or what you believe, and so on and so forth. So what we're doing here is we're just going to cover the aspects of this in relation to the owl theory. And before the exact movements, I want to take a quick little dip into the history of owls in that neighborhood according to Peterson and his new book Behind the Staircase, because it kind of adds to the movements of Kathleen in those last moments of her life. So again, Peterson claims in this new book that he just released that owls lived in he and Kathleen's backyard. They lived in Larry Pollard's backyard, and they also lived across the street. Now, he says that most years there were just 2 owls, but that they also saw 3 at times, assuming the third was their child, their baby, whatever you call a baby owl, maybe baby owl. He also says that the owls used his pool area as hunting ground to catch like little rodents and things like that. And he says that sometimes an owl would perch on the porch railing and would follow he and Kathleen to the pool. And he even claims that one time he was taking the garbage out to the street, and a neighbor came running out of their backyard, screaming, saying that she was terrified. A big owl was staring at her, and it scared her half to death. And so what we can surmise from these passages in his book is that he is setting us up to come to the conclusion that owls lived all over this area of his neighborhood, that they specifically hung out and lived in the pool area where he and Kathleen were. They specifically hung out on the path that Kathleen took to the house, and they had a history of scaring people and didn't seem to be really afraid of people at all. And also the fact that they had a baby owl at times, they become very territorial. So with that being said, let's get into the last movements of her life. Now, this is what Mr. Pollard is saying. So having all that trajectory in mind, he is saying that Kathleen left Peterson and went inside. Now, again, this is December 9th, so this is right around Christmas, so they were preparing to put out Christmas decorations, and Peterson says that they had these balsa wood deer that they would put out in the driveway every year, and the deer were outside the next morning. They had crime scene tape attached to them, and he says that he didn't put them there that night. So the assumption here is that Kathleen put them out there, and she would have had to have done that after she left him at the pool. So Pollard suggests that after Kathleen left Peterson at the pool, she took those deer and went back outside with him to the driveway area, which is that circular drive we talked about. And it's here that he suggested the owl attacked her. And I'm going to show a little picture here of like an owl attack. And he feels like what happened is when the owl came down and hit her, essentially is what they call it, he feels that the owl got stuck on her hair. Now, and most likely, because she didn't know what was happening to her, he says, she was grabbing on her head like this. So if something just came up and slammed the back of her head and grabbed in like that, obviously the first reaction is this number right here, like we can see. And basically from there, she ran inside and passed out trying to get up these stairs and basically started bleeding out. Now, what he says also is that once she came to, is that she tried to get back up again, slept, and fell again. So in this argument, you can kind of see where a mixture of things is taking place according to this theory. So let's... one of the questions that I think is pretty obvious is, can an owl do this kind of damage? So let's see what some of the experts say that weighed in on this case that he spoke with. So let's talk about the experts that weighed in on this case. And these are just a couple, and again, these are really specifically to Mr. Pollard. I'm sure there's lots of expert testimony out there, but for this video, I'm just doing these two here. So let's continue with that in mind. So Brian Robinson, a wildlife expert, he said in an article with Inside Edition that barred owls are territorial. They have been known to harass people for getting too close to their nest site. So keep in mind that Peterson has kind of set us up to think that these owls have babies on his property and whatnot. Now, Robinson has also worked with birds of prey, including barred owls, for like 25 years, it says. And he has never heard of one causing someone's death. And the theory, he says that the theory as detailed by Pollard isn't completely outside the realm of possibility. And I'm going to quote him here, so I'm just going to read from this. Those owls kind of dive bomb at people's heads, he said. It's a defensive tactic. They're defending their territory. Usually it's a flyby attack. They come across and they rake somebody across their head. Is it possible that its feet got entangled in her hair? I suppose that's possible. So just based on a little bit that he's saying there, again, and I see this a lot with other experts and people that talk about owls, it's a level of it's possible, but this seems to be an extreme case. If that is what took place, I mean, it's like a, lightning strike twice type situation. So let's continue with another expert. Kate Davis, who is executive director of Rapports at, let's start that part over. Kate Davis, who is the executive director of Raptors of the Rockies, a Montana-based nonprofit. She says after delving into the evidence, Davis was convinced an owl had attacked Kathleen Peterson, setting into motion the events that would lead to her death at the bottom of the stairs. Now, this is what she based her decision on, and that was the placement of the victim's wound, which I'm kind of reading this verbatim here, a match to how the owl's talons would strike, the timing of her attack. So in December is apparently when owls start mating, and they're really, really territorial, and also the presence of the tiny feather owl feeder cover with them, and force of the impact. So that's just what she said, and she brings up the point of there was a microscopic feather found in Kathleen Peterson's hair, it kind of towards the root of the hair, and these feathers are known to be on owls, and they are at their feet. It's what keeps them silent, and we'll actually get into that a little bit later. So let's continue. So I want to take a minute before we go further to look at some other attacks by barred owls. And again, I invite you to do a Google or YouTube search about barred owl attacks on humans and things like that. You'll see some of these videos come up. And it's interesting and kind of freaky to watch. But anyways, I looked into some of these instances. And so one that was actually local here, this was on January 10th of 2008, and there was two men in Apex, which is kind of in this area that we all live, in the Raleigh-Durham Triangle area. And it's about 10 miles from Peterson's residence. Now, there is a recorded video by security surveillance cameras that caught this, and it shows the sudden, and this is what Pollard wrote about this specific thing, it clearly shows the suddenness and ferocity of such an attack. A second attack on the same men at the same location occurred 10 days later, and again, the bird responsible was an owl, and the injuries were recorded. Now, okay, I watched this, and I just saw one of the attacks. I mean, it takes the guy, he thinks he's getting punched in the back of the head. And when they interviewed him, it looked to me like he had a black eye and some of the puncture wounds, but I mean, he wasn't, maimed or anything. So, and let's go on to the next one. So now this one was up in Maryland, so this isn't in this area. I'm in North Carolina. But a jogger went out for the second time, and he was attacked by a barred owl. And he says, this time it swooped down on my head with its talons 3 separate times. No blood was drawn. So one thing that I think is interesting with both these attacks is, and especially the second one, this is why I wanted to bring this one up, because even though it's not local here, is that he's saying that this owl came down on him. It got him 3 different times, and it had the talons and all that, but no blood was even drawn. So now again, I don't want to be one of these people that says, oh well, since it didn't happen here, it's not possible, because we never know. But if you look at the evidence of these things and you look at Kathleen's injuries, in my humble opinion, I mean, to me it looks like a maiming took place with her. I would expect more of like, a tiger attack on her than I would an owl, especially when you compare it to these other things. I mean, if this is what took place there, then I mean, this is a really upset owl, and I mean, it was out for blood, and literally, not figuratively speaking. So again, this is an area where I invite you to look up, because also if you look at, before we move on, let me say one more thing. If you look at the pictures of her holding her head, I mean, that part seems plausible. And so my thing on that too is, well, she's grabbing her head, the owl's sitting here, it's got a hold of her, she's kind of struggling with it, because I just imagine what I would do, and my first thing would be to try and throw something. Well, these things have powerful feet and talons, and so she's trying to do that, and maybe it's letting go and grabbing and letting go and grabbing. I mean, there is some plausibility there, and I think the word plausibility is going to play an extreme amount of importance in this specific case. So with that being said, let's continue on. So let's talk briefly for a minute about the Dr. Phil episode that Peterson was on. Now, and also in the new book. Again, that book is called Behind the Staircase. Now, the profits do go to charity on that, so if you are interested in reading it, I'm going to be doing like a book review conversation with it on here. I've gotten a little bit into it. It sheds a lot of light on the case, in my opinion, and probably not in a good way for Peterson. But I invite you to join me along in that. So let's continue. Now, Dr. Phil brings this owl theory up, and in my opinion, and you can, if you've seen the Dr. Phil episode, I'm interested in your opinion as well. To me, Peterson says, that Rudolph believes that this is the best explanation for what caused the wounds to Kathleen. And I'm going to read real quick a statement from his website on the owl theory. And this is what Rudolph, Peterson's attorney, says. It's a very plausible theory, Rudolph said. I can't sit here and say that it's accurate. Do I think it's more plausible than any other theory that I've heard until now? Yes. So when Dr. Phil asked Peterson about the owl theory, Peterson doesn't seem to really own up to that, and he kind of seems a little embarrassed by it. Earlier in the episode, when Dr. Phil asked him, do you think your wife fell down the stairs? He says yes, and he says that Henry Lee, the blood expert on the defensive side, is the one who offered the scientific evidence for that. So that's what he goes with. What confuses me is that also in Peterson's book, he kind of, as we've already heard previously, he really lines up this explanation for the owl theory, so that almost as if you want to go down that rabbit hole and believe it, Peterson has connected all the dots for you. He has told the story. And so that's the part that I just feel like he's trying to jump from thing to thing to make it like, well, this could happen and that could happen. And at the end of the day, according to him, if we go verbatim, he doesn't know what happened. So maybe in his world, both these things could have happened. But again, the owl theory just kind of seems so absurd out there. It doesn't seem like he's really wanting to own up to that one and say, yep, that's what happened. So I just found that interesting. So let's take a look into more of what Rudolph Peter's attorney has to say. Now, I went to Rudolph's website, and again, that's Peterson's lawyer who we saw during the staircase. I went to his website, and he actually has a section on there about the owl theory, and he's also, I'm not sure if he's still on the tour, but he did a tour talking about the owl theory. Now, I have not gone to that tour specifically, but I did recently watch a video on it, like one of his locations that he did the tour, I think in Los Angeles, and I'm going to have to do another video on that because it's very in-depth, and there's a lot to go over, and I don't want to do it here. But on his website, he presents what he says is the circumstantial evidence supporting the owl theory. And so I just want to go read through this real quick, just so that we can all kind of have that here, because I do think that this is where a lot of this adds up to plausibility for this theory if you want to go down that road. Here's the circumstantial evidence that supports the theory that Kathleen went out to the front yard, perhaps to place a small reindeer seen in the photos of the scene taken by police, and a barred owl inflicted the injuries. So here we go. Barred owls living in the woods by their house. Barred owls can be aggressive and dangerous. Barred owls have attacked people on numerous occasions. There were blood droplets outside in the walkway leading to the front door of the house, as shown in the police photos. There was a large smear of blood on the outside of the front door frame, as shown in police photos. At least 2 of the wounds on Kathleen Peterson's scalp are in the shape of the talons of a barred owl, as shown on the autopsy photos. And the tiny wounds on Kathleen's face are consistent with the tip of an owl's beak. And please hold. A feather was found on Kathleen Peterson's body. A twig was found in the dry blood on Kathleen Peterson's body. There were numerous strands of Kathleen Peterson's head hair, which the roots indicated had been pulled out, not cut, found in dry blood on her hands. Kathleen's head injuries are not consistent with her having been beaten by a blunt object or on a stair, as she had no brain injury or swelling, no subdermal hematoma, and no skull fracture. And he says, of course, none of this absolutely proves it was a barred owl that inflicted the initial wounds on Kathleen Peterson, but as circumstantial evidence goes, it seems pretty pervasive and credible. So, and he does have a point here. I think that all these aspects that he brought up, all this, again, circumstantial evidence, if you go down that road, it's there. Now things that made me say, I'm not sure about this, the microscopic hairs, and again, I want to touch on that because I didn't talk about that too much in this video. I was kind of saving that towards the end. So microscopic hairs were found in her hair, and this was kind of found after the fact, and that's an aspect that is, I am definitely invite you to go to Pollard's website and read up on what he says about that. But they were found there, and again, owls have their feathers get tinier and tinier. It's what keeps them silent in flight. And so the thinking is, oh, okay, well, here we go. These little feathers were found here. And again, this motion's going on. She's doing this number. The feathers come out. My thinking had always been, when they said microscopic feathers, was just like I'm sitting here. Well, if an owl was above, maybe a feather fell down and landed in the top of my hair. And so what Pollard is saying is, no, where these feathers would be a little bit more than just falling in your hair. Now, another thing that people say about the feathers is that, well, if there was this huge struggle with flailing this, because these birds don't weigh that much, flailing this bird around, wouldn't there be bigger feathers? And I don't know. I'm not an expert in that. I don't know. My thought would be along those lines, but maybe not. So there's a lot of stuff with that. And again, I invite you to go check out Pollard's website and just see what he says for himself about that, because it goes really in depth. So let's go ahead and head to the conclusion of this and continue on with that. All right. In conclusion, if you're still with me, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for making it all the way through the video. So again, so at the end of the day, what is my opinion of the owl theory? I always say this, if I were on the jury with what I saw in the staircase, because I do firmly believe that we did not see everything, I was not there in the courtroom every single day, but what I saw, I would not have convicted Michael Peterson. I felt like there was a shred of doubt. There was too many things of, well, maybe this could have happened. Now again, the owl theory hadn't even been presented then. And also, if you go and look at the speeches that Rudolph is giving now, he goes into more dynamics of why the staircase took place, why we saw what we saw, but he also talks about the owl theory. Essentially, the owl theory was never used because Peterson got out of jail. And, the whole blood evidence that Dwayne Deaver lied about exonerated him from the crime. Now, he did it didn't exonerate him, I'm sorry. He pled to an Alfred plea, which is basically saying, you have enough evidence to convict me, so I don't want to go to trial. I'm admitting guilt, but I'm not guilty. So it's a very, slippery type of plea, but it kept him out of prison, and it's, done with. So now one thing that Larry Pollard said is that, if they were to exhume the body and do some DNA testing of the wounds to see if there is owl DNA there, then this could essentially solve this real quickly. As we all probably know at this point, Peterson really doesn't have the money to do this type of stuff anymore. He's an older gentleman now. He's like 75. He wants to kind of, according to Pollard, just enjoy the rest of his time. He has grandkids, he has kids, so he just kind of wants to do that. It's done. He's not going back to prison over this. So what's done is done. So, and that seems plausible. Another thing that I kind of find like, well, my gosh, if you wanted to vindicate yourself from this, this could do it. But again, I have no idea how much it costs to do this. And it's very upsetting. I mean, whether you think it's guilty or not, there's other people that are affected by this. I mean, Kathleen has a loving family. So I seriously doubt after all this that they would want to see their sister's body dug up to test for owl DNA. It is what it is when it comes to that. So again, I think Rudolph in his statement that he said sums up this case, that this is a case about reasonable doubt. And so for me, without the owl theory, there is reasonable doubt. Yes, I do think that there's stuff about Peterson's personality that makes me say, or statements that don't add up that I go, but there was enough reasonable doubt that I could not convict him on what I saw. And so back to the owl theory here, do I think that an owl did this? No, I personally don't think an owl did this. Do I think that is it a possibility? Well, yeah, it's a possibility. I think there's definitely enough circumstantial evidence here to say this could possibly happen. A chain of events, this is a better way to say it. In my opinion, something like this, if it took place, a chain of events were set off that encompass this event. Now, one thing that Pollard also said is that he did agree that Miss Peterson sat at the bottom of the stairs for at least 2 hours and bled out and died. So there's 2 hours of Peterson being unaccounted for, essentially sitting by the pool. But if we remember, at one point, his story was that he came in, he went to turn the lights out, and when he came back inside, he went to go outside and turn the pool lights off. When he came back in, Kathleen was at the stairs. Then the story changed to he's been sitting outside. So there's all these little inconsistencies there. This feather possibly could have come from a down pillow. So again, the way the cookie crumbled in this case was such a way that, and then when you add up all of the doings of the Durham County prosecution team and judicial system, all that combined allowed him to walk. And I do not believe that he got a fair trial. I do not think that Durham County judicial system did a good job with that at all. And so because of that, he was able to walk. Now, if they did go back to trial and they brought this owl theory into play, and one reason that Rudolph also talks about it in other people is because it sounds so absurd and people make fun of it. And this is one of the things that Mr. Pollard feels too. And after talking to him and looking at his research, it sounds to surface level like, oh, this guy saw an owl in his backyard and said that the owl did it. And he's actually really, really researched this. And so I think that he's not given enough credit on that part to see how far he went with the research and talking to experts and doing things. And so because of that, I think it's worth looking more into his research and coming up to our own opinions about it. So I think he did a great job when it comes to that. And again, at the end of the day, could something like this happen? Possibly. If there was a combination of an attack by the owl, a slip on the stairs, which led to a hitting of the head, but because each person's saying something different, it just, everything contradicts one another. So again, that is the mysteriousness of the staircase trial that keeps my interest and maybe y'all's interest going and the discussions flowing. So I would love to hear from y'all on this. And again, this is not the end-all be-all owl theory. There's probably more evidence out there, but I just wanted to go over some of the things that really jumped out to me about it and get that discussion going here on our channel. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. If you liked all this and you want to subscribe to me, absolutely come join the Sofa Squad. And I'll talk to y'all soon.